Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ian Campbell. I'm Vice President of Operations at PACICC and the staff lead for your Risk Officers Forum, and I'm also your moderator for this afternoon's webinar. Today we're looking at emerging risks, risk identification and risk assessment, a very popular session. We did this last February, and are repeating it based on the positive feedback we received in the satisfaction surveys. I'm joined by three of our insurer members here. Paulina Abraham, Sonny D'Agostino, and Brandon Blant. And I'll circle back in a moment and introduce them more fully in a minute. I just want to talk about some housekeeping items. So first off, we're on location, filming in downtown Toronto, live in the PACICC offices. So if you hear phones, if you hear some of the AC system, I understand there's a bit of a buzzing. We apologize for that, but those are the foibles for broadcasting live. With our webinars, we like to drill deep into topical issues and concerns for risk management professionals in the industry across Canada. We use our webinars to connect interested parties who can't be here to join us in person. It's proven to be a very popular format. We're now in our 7th full year of operation, very proud of that. And today's topic, we looked at this and had discussions with some of our members earlier, and they really find value in beginning the year, the very first webinar of the year, looking to identify risks, the black swan issues, that sort of thing, and assessing risks. And members also like to hear from competitors in the industry, sharing their ideas in very frank and informal discussion. And we want to welcome here everybody. If it's your first time joining us, a very special welcome. We are the #1 talk show for senior risk professionals in the Canadian P&C insurance industry. In fact, we're the only ones doing this, so maybe that's why. I have to talk about antitrust compliance to satisfy our lawyers. The Competition Act rules the day here. There will be no collusion. We won't be talking about approaches to business strategies, claims adjusting practices, scopes of coverage, resolution of mixed claims, management of third-party vendors, and service providers. A disclaimer I should also mention here is we've invited our panelists here to share personal views and observations. The comments that they're going to give you don't necessarily reflect their company's opinions or PACICC's, but they're here to share past experiences and again try to contribute to best practices in the industry. Our webinars are recorded. You will find them very shortly. You'll find past webinars on our website, but you'll find this one very shortly. And they are suitable for on-demand rebroadcast in future. And the guest panel. Okay, let's talk about this. Tremendous interest in today's session. I was talking earlier with our panelists that it's almost mythic. They've achieved rockstar status. We have 1 in 4 companies joining us in the webinar today. Just phenomenal attendance, and people want to listen in. It's a very unique situation here. It's a highly competitive industry, and we have panelists here sharing ideas about risk management approaches that they've used in the past that have helped to contribute to the success of their organizations. Everybody's looking over the fence all the time. They like to hear about what everyone else is doing, and this is the session to allow you to do that. So it's very noble. We thank our panelists for being here. It shows their commitment to enhancing best practices in the industry. So farthest from me is Paulina Abraham. She is risk manager for the Boiler Inspection and Insurance Company of Canada. Welcome, Paulina. Next to Paulina is Sonny D'Agostino. Sonny is operations risk manager for Farm Mutual Re. Welcome. And finally, Brandon Blant, closest to me, is vice president of risk management with Intact Financial Corporation. Brandon is also chair of our risk management advisory committee, which oversees the Risk Officers Forum activities and events throughout the year. So thanks for your participation in that and for being here today. I circulated biographies earlier, and we'll be following up with satisfaction surveys later on to gauge your thoughts on today's webinar, and I'll also include the bios with that, so do watch for that in time. Some of the rules about today, we received questions from lots and lots of questions from members. I think there were 40-something questions, between 40 and 50 questions. We divided those up. We have a lead person here to begin the discussion. I'm going to throw it in turn to our panelists, and we've tried to roll up the questions into various categories. I have most of the questions assigned a lead person here. There are some orphan questions we'll come back to as time permits, but we're going to be talking in a number of, I guess I've got 4 different areas. We're going to talk about tools and risk identification sources. Very specific risks is our second category. The third category, processes, strategies, and approaches to risk management, risk identification. And finally, personal observations from our panelists. So I'm going to begin by looking down the table, or actually look right here to Brandon. What risk identifications do you use at Intact, and what do you find successful?
Thanks, Ian. Well, a lot of the standard risk management matrices that we see and we use for just general risk assessment, you'll see the impact along one axis and you'll see likelihood along the other. When it comes to emerging risks, I feel that it's a lot harder to assess the likelihood of an event happening. It's even difficult to assess impact. And so I like to think of things as, okay, what are the possible scenarios? How bad could this potentially get? And think about the timeframes involved. So is this something near term that's evolving very quickly? Is this a longer term trend that's evolving? And then you can basically develop your own standard matrix with a heat map where you have green, yellows, and reds for the importance of the risk, and that can drive the discussions and the potential mitigations that the organization takes.
So a company your size, how many different risks would we have on that heat map identified?
Yeah, so there's generally about a half a dozen. You want to keep it to the most important ones, because certainly you can find a whole catalog of potential emerging risks, and I think it's about thinking and reflecting on which ones matter the most and which ones will actually require some type of attention at the organization.
Okay. Other panelists, do you have tools you want to talk about? Risk identification tools used in your organization? I'll just throw it up. If you don't, we'll move on.
We use similar tools to what Brandon explained. I think and you touched upon it, I think the key is synthesizing that mass amount of information to ask the question, really, how is this going to impact my organization or potentially my clients? So that's sort of the viewpoint that when we go through the risk workshops or do the surveys to try and quantify something that's evolving and not necessarily quantifiable, say, okay, if there is a piece of this, then what piece would actually impact us? And then in my particular case, for a reinsurance perspective, or we reinsure our member companies, would that actually impact one of our members? So.
Okay. Paulina, we're good?
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, we'll move on. Question number 2, and I'll throw this to Paulina. How and from whom do you get risk information in your organization?
Okay, so we, on a quarterly basis, we prepare internal risk reports. And in order to gather information for the risk reports, there are regularly scheduled meetings that I schedule and with the executive team and also with the department heads. And during these meetings, it's one-on-one meeting. I discuss new and existing risks. And between the sessions also, these sessions are only scheduled every half a year or so. But also, of course, as we go through the year, through the annual cycle and the preparation of the quarterly risk report, issues do come up. And then people do bring them to my attention, and then we address them accordingly.
Okay. Gentlemen, other sources, risk information, your organization, do you...
It's pretty similar with us. I mean, you find people in the organization who have an interest in this sort of subject, who have an important role, who have, developed opinions, and I think the idea is to make sure that you're reaching out to people so that it can help influence the views that you form as an organization.
Okay. Sonny?
Yeah, I think internally, the more individuals you can touch, the more that you can get their opinions. In this particular case, I think actually more is better from the standpoint of everyone has a view or a perception of how potentially a risk may impact the organization. So I think if you look at it from a siloed approach and don't go across the organization to get as many views as you can, you may end up missing something.
That's a good point. Okay. Our next question, we'll go back to Sonny. How do you use benchmark studies to identify risks at Farm Mutual Re?
So from the standpoint of, in this particular case, for a benchmark study, I'm defining benchmark studies as thought leadership or research that's done at the global level by experts in those fields looking at a particular risk. So with that in mind, then we look at all the various sources that are out there that are done by industry, reinsurers. Let's say the World Economic Forum report
That's a big one.
is a big one. Various, for example, I also follow the Bank of Canada and the U.S. Fed in to see their monetary policy reports. They usually talk about emerging risks and those reports and how they would impact the economy. So you gather all that information, and then back to what Brendan had said about prioritizing and trying to come up with and implement the likelihood of an event happening and that event and the impact. But I think that the key question, and I'll go back to this, is that all this information is at this high a level up. It's at the global level, and I think that you have to ask yourself is really, to boil down to it, is how is this going to impact our organization? I think that is the key. And the other thing, at one point, the individual shared with me their view that not everyone's risk is your risk. And from the standpoint that you look at some of the studies and they're so well done. I mean, they're voluminous in nature, and you can't necessarily say that all of them is going to be your risk. So that goes kind of to the prioritization of what is actually going to impact your organization.
Are there other studies, other sources of written information that people can get ideas from? Those are good ones. The World Economic Forum report is everything. Really.
Yeah, there's two that I like a lot. One is the Sonar report from Swiss Re. That's an annual report that they do. I find that's very, very well done, very comprehensive, and gives a lot of ideas, not just for P&C, but also life and health, and also operational and financial emerging risks as well. So that's a pretty comprehensive report that we generally dissect pretty thoroughly when it comes out. Another one, there's a CRO forum in Europe, which is a group of, much like the PACICC Risk Officers Forum we have here, they have a European version, and they have a risk radar as well, an emerging risk radar that they put out, and a pretty comprehensive website. So those are a couple of resources that I find really helpful in terms of the risk identification and just getting us to start thinking about possibilities.
And this is something over the years, our 7th year of operation now, and we never delved into identifying risk. Just only a couple of years ago did we think, let's commit the first webinar of the year to actually identifying risks, because these sources, talking about sources of information like that, exactly what people want to know. And I think that's why we have such a strong following today, that people want to know, where's everyone else getting their information. It's been successful, the things I'm doing right now, but I don't know that I'm tapping every resource that I can. So those are helpful suggestions. I appreciate that. Thank you. So let's move on. Brandon, what sources of information for scanning the horizon for future and emerging risks do you use, or would you recommend? It's a little bit repetitive there.
Yeah, I think I covered that one already.
Okay, so let's go on to Paulina. At your organization, how does strategic planning and risk management work together on identifying emerging risks, and how effectively are these functions collaborating to support strategic directions?
Okay, so in our organization, we define emerging risks as new or changing risks with high degree of uncertainty in terms of occurrence probability and loss amounts. And we look at those risks and we assess them as part of our annual strategy. And also, we look at the risks, the emerging risks as a threat, as an opportunity, or sometimes both. So this is how the analysis works. And we're equipment breakdown company, so a lot of our business is commercial lines, and there are some specialized products. And so for us, a lot of that would be technology driven, right? So we would look at that and say, okay, is it a product opportunity? Is it a threat for us? Both. And this is how we analyze and approach those risks.
And Sunny, Brandon, do you want to add to that, or?
Well, I guess one comment I'll make is, as risk officers, we think a lot about what adverse scenarios, what can happen. But I think it's important to also keep in mind, in the context of developing strategy and decision making, that some of these risks are also opportunities. And cyber is a good example. 20 years ago, we weren't writing cyber coverage as as an industry, and now it's fairly commonplace. So some of the things that we see showing up on our emerging risk list are also opportunities as well. So I think to the earlier point about it's not everybody's risk, well, I'll go one step further and add to that, Sunny. It's actually an opportunity for some of us. Yeah.
For sure. From that standpoint, I think that it's so important that planning and risk communicate on a constant basis, because that opportunity could be lost. I mean, in the end, you're either going to respond by mitigating something or leveraging something, and whatever that something is. And I think that if that communication doesn't exist between the risk management function and the planning function, then you may miss one of those opportunities, because one of you thinks maybe it's a threat, and it's it. Mentioned, like, one of you may think it's a great opportunity here.
Okay. I want to thank everybody out there. These questions are all over the map, and they touch on organizations large and small. And you've seen here we're covering all the bases. And that's the great thing is that they're applicable to companies large and small. The next question to Sunny. Do you have any tips for implementing an emerging risk identification process? You're a smaller organization in the industry.
Yeah.
How do you do this in a small organization? And maybe I'll come back to Brandon and ask in a larger organization, what tips would you have if you're starting to implement this or enhance what you're doing? What steps do you take?
So I think from the perspective of identifying individuals that this is part of their responsibilities or role, and not just an additional function to, let's say, your other job, or whichever way you want to put that component of it, that it's not a mixed responsibility, I guess maybe might be the best way of explaining it, but that there is someone or a group of people that are always trying to keep abreast of what's happening inside the external environment, because it's a challenging thing to do. The external environment changes every minute. And while we're sitting in here, there's stuff changing out there. And so it's not a once a year sort of process either. I think that from the standpoint of best practices, it should be done on a continuous basis, that you're always continually looking at what's happening out there, and then go back to those assessments that you did and see whether or not that the potential outcome of that risk has changed. And because you may end up discovering that there is an opportunity there, or there's a threat. And I think to a certain extent sometimes too is that we read about a lot of insurance-related publications, and I think the other thing would be that look beyond insurance and insurance publications. Is actually try and follow as many things as you can and just consume information. This is more from a personal perspective, not necessarily an organization perspective, but I use Twitter. I don't use Twitter to tweet. I don't use Twitter to allow people to follow me.
Right.
It's just, but I follow probably about 1,200 things, because it's a one way that you can just amass constant information and consume information. And I think that's the key to the process, is trying to get as much information as possible as what's happening in the external environment from a pestle standpoint, and then also from just customers, just how customers are reacting with companies, competitors, disruptors, and so on and so forth.
And Brandon, do you, for a larger organization, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways it's very similar to just the regular top risk management process. So your top enterprise risks, right? So once you've gone through the identification, maybe the assessment for emerging risk will be less quantitative, for example, and so it'll be a little bit more qualitative. But once you've established where it's falling in terms of your heat maps, you'll need to define people who will help with doing research, further research, who's going to be involved in the mitigation, that sort of thing, and just going through each of them one at a time. Take them one at a time. I think it sounds a little bit more challenging, and it is from an assessment perspective, but I view them very much in a similar manner to how you would approach any top enterprise risk the organization is facing.
Another question came up, and it's interesting. I think this was raised last year. I thought we'd put it back in. And it's all about no-go areas you can't be allowed to factor in risk identification. What alternatives are out there to properly reflect risk levels if the government limits the use of postal codes for risk identification in the future? So do you find, are there things government's doing that you'd love to have further information in this area, but that's off limits? We can't use postal information. We can't delve at that level. Are you constrained in any way? Sources of information about risk levels? We don't have to go into this, but is that an area of concern for you? Do you find there are certain challenges where there's kind of black holes for information? You'd love to know more or be able to use this source of information, but government legislation prohibits that?
I think probably the reverse is becoming true. That regulators are not necessarily restricting everything at this point, and there's so much data available. There's so much data out there that the number of data points and the ways of looking at information are just escalating really, really quickly. So I think that's definitely something that, for me, regulatory risk, or the risk that they change the rules, or that's always ever present for our industry as a heavily regulated industry. Mm-hmm. But on the data side of things, I think things are opening up.
Another question came up, and this is not assigned, but I thought to throw it out there. What's the biggest misunderstanding regarding risk assessment that you encounter when talking risk in your company? What do you find is most misunderstood? You're the chief pessimist in your organization, no doubt. That's what you're paid to do. Worry about things. What's the biggest misunderstanding your colleagues have about your job, what you do in the organization? Is there?
Well, I guess because insurance is such an essential part of risk assuming business, right? We assume risk from our clients who understand what is risk management is, and then I come across and I'm telling I'm risk manager for this organization, and they're confused because they think they're all risk managers, and rightfully so, right? And then I tell them, okay, come down, come sit down. We'll have a discussion about first line of defense, second line of defense, right. Third line of defense, and about internal controls and about business continuity. So this is all risk. So they do understand the difference, right? They do understand that the risk manager at a manufacturing facility or power grid facility will be somebody who is totally different and in charge of different responsibilities than the risk manager for an insurance company. So it's always an interesting discussion to have, and they're actually quite grateful for that. And they say, oh, thank you. It's very interesting. What you do is very, very interesting, and they see the value in this.
You provide a different perspective, and
yes.
they appreciate that.
Yeah.
Do you find challenges in your organization with colleagues understanding the role of risk manager?
When I looked at this one, I thought the biggest misunderstanding regarding risk assessment. And so I didn't take it from really an organizational standpoint. I took it from that teaching class at Laurier and just when you're having discussions even with colleagues, is that sometimes we have a tendency to focus on the outcome of an event and not necessarily the drivers. So when I think about what's the biggest misunderstanding regarding risk assessment is that focus that potentially we don't actually get to the root of what's going to cause the event to take place. So that's the way I interpreted the question.
Okay, fair game. Our next category, broad category, we rolled up into specific risks. And I should tell you on April 1st at our Risk Officers Forum meeting, Paul Kovacs is going to be speaking about climate change. Just questions about climate change. He's going to be talking about the new science of earthquake. And I'll come back to that later on about putting a plug in for future events. But just while I was thinking of it, it came up in a question here. So, Brandon, as an industry, what role do you think we play in climate change?
Well, I think we play a really important role for sure. Definitely in terms of helping society adapt as the climate is evolving quickly. We've been, for a long time, I would say, providing incentives and also just in the way that we underwrite risks, pricing out risks really well and properly will help consumers adapt their behavior to less risky, whether it's building construction or the place where you build your house in the first place, all of these sorts of things. I mean, I think one, we have a voice, and two, I think in our loss prevention activities and also in our underwriting and pricing, we have a role to play in helping direct society appropriately.
Because it is top of mind. It's a risk that's, I mean, it's causing all the problems right now that we're seeing in with all of the protests and whatnot, but it's a risk that's not going away. It's an area that is a big concern. Others, the role that we play in climate change, do you want to comment on that, or?
I'd say I spent a fair amount of my insurance career so far on claims, and spending and adjudicating claims and being on the road, so on and so forth. And in that time, you see people rebuilding what they've had and putting the policy in play. And you're starting to see now that we're starting to think about solutions as an industry that allow people to use some of their coverage to rebuild things not the way that they were before, and offer using more resilient materials and so on and so forth. Excuse me. And I think as an industry, from a climate change perspective, it's here. It's not going anywhere. It's probably going to get worse. I don't know that for per se. I can't predict the future. But I think solutions of that nature, I think, is collectively as an industry is where we have to go. That when there is a loss and someone's in need and it's time to deliver the promise, that we build in some things that actually benefit our customer and actually mitigate loss to us potentially going forward as an industry, because we're not rebuilding things the same way that they were before, or using the same kind of materials and so on and so forth.
Okay. Let's go on to the next question. Another specific risk. The challenge sometimes in talking about emerging risks we talk about emerging risks and they keep coming up again and again, year after year, like cyber is an emerging risk, but artificial intelligence, new technology, insurtech, all of that. Somebody asked, the fire, cyber, and regulation are significant risks already facing the industry. Although they're present and currently being dealt with, the quick evolving pace in each of these areas may qualify them as emerging. Do you share this perspective, and how are you addressing the uncertainty within each of these risks? Throw it to Paulina.
Yeah, we do definitely share this perspective. So we address it accordingly, and we do consider this when we look at the regulatory risk, if there is a guideline that coming from OSFI, we definitely assemble working groups and we sit together and we identify how it's going to impact us and what we should do and what kind of changes we should put in place. So from that perspective, definitely it's a team exercise to assess the potential impact from various aspects. As for cyber, for those, it's a threat for us as well as an opportunity. So cyber risk for us is in two buckets. One is is part of underwriting risk. So we need to ensure that we have proper models in place in order to price the risk and see that accumulation is adequate and so on. And for operational cyber risk, of course, we have to ensure that we have proper infrastructure in place to prevent breaches, data leakage, and have good education and awareness program in place. And there is always work to be done on those. It's an evolving risk. It changes every year, so we just adjust accordingly as we go on.
Okay. And others, do you?
Yeah, the examples that were listed in, I would consider those in our top enterprise risks for the most part at this point, and not something specifically emerging. I think fire, cyber, regulatory, these are all things very much already top of mind and not specifically emerging risks for the firm.
Okay. And to that point, we do a enterprise risk management survey of members each year, and we're going now to every second year, just to add a little breathing room between reports to better gauge what's changing. But the last reports we asked at the very end of the survey, we said, can you name your top 3 risks in the industry? What should we really be concerned about right now? So I wrote down the 3 that members are really concerned about. What are your top three, 1, 2, 3, that you're really concerned about right now? What are they?
For us, it's mergers and acquisitions
Okay.
and cyber.
Mhm.
More on operational standpoint than on underwriting side. So operational cyber. Third one would be regulation.
Okay.
So, yeah, new accounting standards, IFRS 17. How you adjust to that? So that would be the three.
Okay, Sonny, what are your top three?
Top three from I would say cyber for sure, regulation, and pricing.
Okay.
And the question, just to be clear, is it just top enterprise or emerging risks specifically? Or-
Top enterprise risks
Okay.
right now.
Well, earthquake for us is certainly an important one. I would say that turbulence in the financial markets is certainly something that can impact the organization. And cyber, I think, remains an important risk for a lot of us, and in particular, as our clients put a lot of trust in us, and it's really important that we maintain that trust. So,
Okay. And that's always the interesting point, what's new and what's emerging, and versus what are risks that are going to be around for the next 5 years that we have to deal with. So sometimes we throw the word emerging around freely. Members came up with new technology, cyber, and climate change. So kind of a meld of your points, but spot on. Okay, Brandon, let's go to you with this one. What risks do you foresee from non-traditional disruptors? And our viewer out there gave us Amazon,
Sure.
Google,
Sure.
etc.
well, so technology is evolving really quickly, and the examples, Google, Amazon, these are technology companies, and they've definitely found ways to become hyper efficient and to use information in ways that
Right.
are very unique, that weren't used in the past. You've seen the Google and Amazon either through going into the distribution aspects of insurance or investing in insurtech, that sort of thing. And I think that's here to stay. I think if there are inefficiencies in any industry, that whether it's smaller ones or the Googles and the Amazons, that they will look for opportunities to exploit these inefficiencies and capture value for their shareholders. So I think that for sure this aspect in our ecosystem is only going to evolve over time, and I think that's definitely something that we keep in mind.
Has it settled out now? We've gone through the whole sharing exercise with ride sharing and sharing accommodation and whatnot. Are there other disruptors out there that you think are kind of percolating along that, or are we kind of settled out for the next 3 or 4 years?
So when I read that, when I read the question to Bill, what Brandon said, I thought about that. I read this article maybe about a month ago or so, maybe a little bit longer, but it talked about how Amazon, JP Morgan, and Berkshire were getting together in the U.S. to study and see if they can develop a solution for rising U.S. healthcare expense. And I'm thinking, given the players there's a lot of capital there. And I think it just goes to your point to say that if they see an opportunity, the capital is there to try and develop a solution and that's better than what the current offering is. And I took that from the article. I didn't necessarily take it that it was pure disruption sort of standpoint that they were going down this initiative, but I found that interesting. That when I read that question, that's just one of those things that popped back in my head.
Okay. Let's move on. It's another question on cyber, and Brandon, you're going to be our lead on this, and then, I'm sorry, it's Paulina, and then we'll throw it to the other panelists. How about the panel assess the current state of cyber risk to clients and insurers? Are the risks well understood? Are insurers responding to provide the right solutions with respect to cyber? This is a topic with the Risk Officers Forum. It's been bandied around for 5 years at least. We've been dealing with this as an emerging risk. It's just morphing, but,
Yeah.
is it well understood? Colleen? What are your
I think
thoughts?
it's understood better.
Okay.
It's in the process of learning, right? As we go through that, yes, we have coverage now, right? For some of the cyber products, we offer that. We do have some loss history now, so we've accumulated quite a lot of data in regards to that risk. That's for sure. If there is place for improvement, for sure, yeah. So it's a learning opportunity for everyone involved, and we learn as we go, and so.
Do you guys feel that the industry is providing the right solutions right now? Is it being managed properly? Cyber risk?
I think that as more events occur and are publicized in the media, people get a better understanding of the different ways that cyber risk can impact organizations, whether it's things like ransomware or data breaches or supply chain attacks, business continuity. So I think it's getting to the point where people have seen a lot of these events. It's been, I would say, over the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of what can happen, and I think the products are definitely evolving over the last number of years to address this. So it's going in the right direction.
It's so surprising when you hear a company's actually bought their way back into their program, into their system, that they actually paid the ransom to unlock the system. It's amazing. I'm just
We've been spending time over the past, let's say, 2 years or so, really focusing on the education piece internally,
okay.
from the standpoint that as employees we could actually be the weakest link. There's that you get on a public Wi-Fi, and that sort of thing, or someone has access to your phone.
And they're getting more sophisticated. The phishing
are.
exercises out there, they really do look like it's one of your friends stuck somewhere and they just want access into your system, and then
the one I watched this video online that showed how potentially they could use an employee where they just bumped into them, and when they bumped into them on the street, they had enough to take the employee pass off of them, and then they got back and reconfigured that employee pass so it had their photo on it. Wow. That's what got them inside the building. That's what allowed them to put whatever needed to be put in the building so that they could hack the system remotely. And so we've been focusing on a lot of how, as employees, we could be the
front line.
Yeah, how we could be the weakest link, like phishing exercises, and IT's sending us fake emails all the time to see whether or not we're and education.
Yeah.
I actually, I must admit, I hit one the other day that looked like it was supposed to be a voicemail from our phone system, and it said then the screen came up and said you hit a phishing email, but it's okay. This one was actually sent to you. Now do this training. And so then after that, I ended up watching a 10-minute refresher on phishing exercises.
And then sometimes you'll get an email from a trusted source, and it turns out, and you phone that person and you say, "Did you send me something?" And they're like, "Yeah." Like, answer it, and then you feel terrible for second guessing them. But this is what we're in that area, the gray area right now. It's crazy.
A colleague of mine in accounting this morning sent one to the rest of the company saying that she received an actual email from another employee in the company asking to open this file that contained her T4. It was all. So she sent an email saying, if anyone gets this, don't respond to this. But it was mimicked enough that it had the email address of someone who currently worked at our company, then sending it to another employee.
Wow. It's crazy. It's getting more sophisticated.
The hackers are quite clever. They'll use coronavirus. They'll use things out of the current events to grab people's attention and piggyback on those themes to get your attention. I mean, these are clever people on the other side. Unfortunately, they're not really putting their best foot forward.
We've advanced from that poor mother or that a widow in Nigeria that had that $21 million and was
now,
waiting for me if I just sent $100.
there are no spelling checks. Yeah, now it's pretty well written. And what we've experienced that fraudsters would go on LinkedIn, obtain the name of the person, and then
Right.
pretend to be one of the executives, and would reach out to our employees and say, "Oh, can you run an errand for me?" And this keeps happening every 3 or 4 months, and
Wow.
it goes through the filtering system because every time they would change their address. So, and we would be able only to block those that we know for sure are phishing, but then they'll go change the address again and again and again, and so, and the best defense against that is really education. You have to educate people. Okay, one of our executives will never go to you and ask you to run an errand, would never do that. Please verify it, not by responding to an email.
Smart.
Do not communicate in any way with a fraudster. Please go to the executive assistant or reach out to them directly by phone. Right, so this would be one of the tips that we're telling them, because it really takes one to expose the whole company to a potential financial loss.
And if you've been targeted once with mild success, if they've had some success, they're probably it's just a matter of time to
Yeah,
crack their system.
yeah, but our employees, we told them you have to be our first line of defense. You have to protect us and yourself too from this potential loss. So they've been very good and responsive, and they understand that there is a danger here.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's move on and talk about car insurance, specific risks. What risks, Brandon, do you foresee in continuing down the path of the current auto insurance products in Canada?
Well, Ian, I think in one word, it's technology. I mean, our cars are becoming equipped with all types of technology. They might not be self-driving at this point, and there are maybe just a few that are starting in some areas. But to me, the evolution of the vehicle itself and the way that that's changing is going to have implications for the product and also in the way that it's managed.
Okay. There's car insurance, you see, we're at that stage where is it, if there's to be an accident, if there's liability assigned, is it the manufacturer with all the safety features in the car, or does it really go back to driver error? We're just kind of handing off as cars become more autonomous. We're in that gray area of transition. What do you?
We don't write car insurance. So
Okay.
Don't be able to say.
Going back to my perspective from claims, that's going to be quite the legal issue when it comes to that time. Where
Are we 20 years away from that? Are we 30 years? Are we 10 years?
Well, I guess you read so many different years as to when we're going to have fully autonomous vehicles on the road. And it ranges, at one point the number was 15 years from now we'll all be driving a fully autonomous vehicle. And then in another article I read, it's 30 years away. And I don't know the answer to that. If I did, then you have the orb. You're able to predict the future. I think about it that from some research that's done on economics perspective, that it's got to say that the average consumers cycle through cars on a 12-year basis. That whole lot of cars has then been on the road and now it's done. So you take that, and then you take cost. I mean, right now these cars that are more fully automated comparatively to, let's say, my Forester, it's not at a price point that everyone can afford it. So I think that plays a role in whether or not this full automation is going to take over all of us as consumers, because that has to achieve economies of scale to keep cost at a relative level that the average consumer can afford that amount of automation, which isn't where it's at today. I mean, the cars that have those automation in there, those are more high-end vehicles.
Right.
So I think that'd be a mitigating factor. The technology might actually come, but
where it hits the base level.
When does the demand come after that? When it's, go back to the evolution of the smartphone. When did everyone decide that we all needed a smartphone? It took a while for all that to happen.
Yeah.
It may take the same kind of concept to say that we all need an fully autonomous vehicle that drives itself. But when the day comes, I think there is going to be to your point, change the product, the pricing, and then the legal side of it on the back end is who's really responsible for this.
Right.
The individual who wrote the algorithm or the person that was driving it. And there's a video, Google it, and it comes up on YouTube, and it's a video on how the outcome of a automated vehicle. And in this vehicle, the vehicle has a choice at the end before the accident happens. It can either go into the back, swerve to the right and hit two people crossing the road.
Right.
It can either continue on straight and hit the back of the car, or it can go to the other side and it ends up hitting a mother with the carrying a stroller.
No good choices. Right.
Yeah. And so what ends up happening in this video is that the car actually goes into the back end, rear ends the truck in front of it, and kills the driver, because the algorithm is programmed that the least
Right.
amount of damage was that scenario.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting too when you think about what other kind of risks that are we then getting into, because there's humans programming this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So-
That human element behind it all.
Yeah, well, there's huge ethics questions that certainly need to be resolved.
For sure.
Okay, we talked about risk identification sources. We talked about specific risks, and now let's talk about processes, strategies, and approaches used in your organizations, either right now or maybe drawing on your experience, past experience. Let's throw the first question to Paulina. How can companies quantify impacts of emerging risks such as cyber, pandemic, terrorism, etc.? How would you go about doing that? Or I can come back, we can stand that one
maybe we
down,
can
sure.
come back, yeah.
Folks, do you, or do you want me to?
I could jump
Sure,
in.
go for
Well, there's, some of these risks like cyber, pandemic, terrorism, there might actually be models available. So reinsurance brokers might be able to assist. Sometimes they're in development, but there are some more in the U.S. than Canada, but nonetheless. Otherwise, going through your exposures and identifying how much, which policies cover, how many of those policies are covered, and just very basically trying to get people on the operations, right, who are
Just to try to map out your exposure.
yeah, to figure it out. What is the what is the total level of insured values we have? I think is a good starting point, and
Okay,
to go from there.
okay. Sunny, we're good?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. And this one will be for Sunny. Despite having guidance in place to help assess and quantify risk, impact, and likelihood, significant judgment is often still required. What advice or changes in process would you recommend to help make this easier for stakeholders, risk owners? Separately, what advice would you give to risk teams as they challenge such assessments as they're made?
So that there's a lot going on in that question.
Right.
So the way I kind of boiled it down to that, when we talked about the use of surveys and heat maps and the impact and likelihood, and some of it's quantifiable, some of it's not. And when you can't quantify potentially to a number, and you go to the other side, there is going to be an individual judgment piece. I think it's just that part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought about, okay, well, if there is going to be some individual bias, how would I potentially remove that individual bias?
So you're saying if you had this job and you, a year from now, somebody else is in the chair, they're gonna have a completely different outlook in your organization, maybe, or?
Well, and so I thought about individual biases and then going from the standpoint of filling out surveys to get the impact on the likelihood. I said, okay, when we're doing this, is the group large enough to maybe smooth out that bias when we're doing these assessments? Let's say like 8 to 18 people instead of asking 3 people. Then I thought about if we're doing it from a risk workshop perspective, then allow people to have the chance to discuss the outcome, maybe do a revote, banter back and forth what individual opinions are. I found that when that happens, it actually sometimes sways other people's opinions.
Right.
You have to be careful of group think. That's potentially an issue with that component
The
of it.
questions you ask sometimes lead to the answers you want.
Right, and then overarchingly, I think that there has to be someone that through these surveys, it's not really a democratic process.
Mhm.
There has to be a risk owner or someone who's sponsoring the workshop, and then they have the final say, or that person has the final say and say, yeah, we accept this outcome. This makes sense to us in relation to the business or whichever manner that you're doing it for. So that's how I kind of boiled down that question. There was, to me, when I first saw
There's a lot there.
there's a lot
for sure.
going on. In
There's
that
a couple of
question.
buried questions in there. Others, Brandon, Paulina, do you want to jump in or no? Okay, I got lots of questions, don't worry about it. I got lots and lots. Next question. We do the Enterprise Risk Management Survey, and one of the questions we ask our members is, how are you communicating with the board? It's very important that with the liability in an organization, the board has to be connected in the decision-making process, and you have to be just uniform, right throughout the organization, making sure that the communication is top-down, bottom-up, and shared on a regular basis. You know the information the board is getting, the information from you, the risk manager, about what's going on and how risks are being assessed. So what do you do? How do you collect feedback from your board in your organization? And maybe this is good if we can ask everybody on the panel, how do you communicate with your board to know that what you're doing as management is spot on, it's in sync with their thoughts and wishes?
Yeah, absolutely. So we conduct quarterly board meetings. There are 4 board meetings a year, and also there are various committees. There is audit and finance and so on, and our audit committee oversees everything related to risk.
Okay.
And the members of audit committee are also the members of the board. So when audit committee does not meet, it's the board that takes looks over the
So
risks.
your board's meeting 4 times a year. Your standing committees are meeting how many times? Your audit and risk committee would meet 4 times as well, maybe?
A little bit less.
A little bit less, okay.
Yeah. But there are risk related matters that are presented at every board meeting, right? So they are presented quarterly. We regularly present the most recent, the most up-to-date risk report. So
Right.
the most recently available risk report, so which is quarterly, that is presented. Then of course there is ORSA, there is risk strategy, GCAT is presented, memos on internal controls framework also are shared with the board, and then we share the progress on the business continuity program. And so it's very vivid, very live
So there are
discussion.
no bricks in the head. they're on this all the time. They get a continuous flow of information
They
all
are
the time. And
continuously up to date, and we also give them some injects, for example, on cyber. We want them to be a little bit more aware on cyber risk. So we bring people that are experts on cyber
and do a board information session, that sort of thing with the board
we
members?
do that too, yeah. It's all very well received. There are always a lot of questions. They always comment on what we do, and we take this back and modify the reports accordingly, risks, description, and so on. It's very good process.
So your risk management report is almost a living document. It just keeps getting
That's correct.
updated all the time. It
it's-
exists at any given point in time. You can,
It's always up to date.
it exists and you
Always
can
up
find
to
out.
date, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. And that's with what we do at PACICC is the same. We have a living document risk management report. We
Yeah.
have risks for the organization. We update those and a couple of board meetings a year, and the audit and risk committee brings this forward, and it's same. So
Yeah.
when you're talking, I can just picture it's exactly what we do.
Exactly,
So how about yourself, Sonny? Are you?
We have a schedule that throughout the course of the year that certain reports go to the board for review that covers one report covers the financial insurance activities, one report's strictly on cyber, another one covers operational risk and reputational, strategic, and emerging. So, and then the board sees those at various levels on top of your DCAT, your ORSA, and so on and so forth.
Your organization, one of the larger organizations.
Well,
huh?
it's actually quite similar to
On a
what
different scale, but-
Paulina
okay.
described. Yeah, I would say she did a pretty good job of describing that.
Yours are
We have a
quarterly
quarterly
meetings? Yeah,
meetings,
okay.
and we have a quarterly risk report covering emerging risks, etc. And it's a pretty rigorous process, and we're collecting feedback from our board as well on a regular basis.
Okay, so there's a takeaway for everyone out there. Everyone's doing the same thing, so do that.
Yeah.
Everyone's in
Best
sync on that one.
practice.
There's the best practice, absolutely. That's what comes up in our ERM reports. Okay, let's go to Brandon on this one. Question number 4, under processes, strategies, and approaches. What advice would you give risk managers in identifying the root causes of a risk rather than confusing them with symptoms of a risk? Are there questions one can ask when faced with this conundrum?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think, right, and Sunny talked a little bit about this before, just making sure that you're getting at what are the root causes. So how you have to really ask people what can happen, and if they're talking about outcomes, then you ask the question, well, okay, so what would happen so that outcome would happen? So I think it's by reframing questions to get people thinking about what is causing a certain outcome. I think that's the way to approach it, and eventually you get past, okay, here's the outcome, focusing on, here are the outcomes, and focusing more on what exactly can generate the adverse scenario.
Do you have this problem in your organization, cause versus effect, symptoms versus the root cause? Is that ever an issue for you folks?
Not really, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on. The next question is going to be for Polina. Can you provide examples of top-down and bottom-up approaches that you currently use to identify emerging risks? And how would you amalgamate the risks to provide a high-level corporate view?
Okay. So for the emerging risks, it's a combination of both. It was a top-down approach and also bottom-up approach. So in 2018, we conducted a pretty labor-intense exercise in regards to emerging risks, when also coordinated by the head office in the States. We were given an inventory of risks, emerging risks that we had to choose from, what is applicable to us. And to those risks, we also added something that was not on the list, but was specific to us, again, related to commercial lines, let's say aging infrastructure, and changing concept of insurance, so IoT and so on.
But you thought when you're presented with that list of risks, you thought that's a pretty comprehensive list of
It was
everything out
pretty
there?
comprehensive.
Okay.
Yeah, we started with something like 40, and then we went down to 20, and then we ended up with 5, right?
And
then,
again, we're talking, these come from some of the sources we talked about earlier.
yes,
Those risks come
yeah,
from the
scanning the
World Economic Report.
horizon and all the think tanks,
Right.
yeah, so.
Because you don't want to, when you ask somebody cold, what are all the risks? I don't know. But if they had a
Yes.
list, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
Okay.
And then at each and every risk, so we had this inventory of risks, and then we looked at the impact size. So is it going to be small, medium, or large impact? And then the nature of this risk. Is it a threat, opportunity, or both? And then also the time and impact. Is it going to have the biggest impact on us within a year, or from 1 to 5 years, or over 5 years? And these are the conclusions that we came, right? Okay, so there are those 5 risks that were either identified as a threat or opportunity or both. And then, of course, there are actions for us to act upon. And also how we came to the conclusions, we asked very specific questions. So 4 very specific questions we asked. Is it a loss for us, or how did we ask it? Again, just something along this line. So is it going to impact us immediately or not? How do we understand it? Do we understand it well, or do we lack knowledge in regards to that? And also, is it a loss for us? Is it going to be a loss for us, or is it going to be a business opportunity for us? So again, 4 very simple questions, and then we aggregated this data in the tool, and there was a radar that we drew, and we put these risks there. So we mapped, there was technology, there was economy, there was politics, there was environment, so different categories there, and those risks were mapped on that radar.
So you talked about opportunities and threats. What I guess a threat we talked about earlier is cyber. A lot of folks
Yeah.
at this table see cyber as a real risk, a real
Yeah.
threat to the organization. What would you see as a good risk, an opportunity? What's a risk?
Both cyber as well. So cyber is an opportunity for us,
Okay.
right? So we can offer cyber products, and we do offer cyber products for us. Or let's say IoT, right? So smart factory. So if you put, let's say, sensor technology, right, you can do a lot of activities related to loss prevention. So that's, you will probably have less losses as a result, but you're providing such a valuable service to your clients, right? And through the sensors technology, and let's say aging infrastructure, well, that's definitely it will be a threat for us, because aging people do not invest enough money to keep the equipment up to date. Therefore, it will incur more losses as a result. So each risk was assessed that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Pauline is saying that she uses both top down and bottom up
Yes.
to come up with a workable solution for her organization? Is it, if, in looking at risks in your organizations, you two, Sunny and Brandon, is it top down, is it bottom up in a larger organization? Must it always be top down, or what would you, how would you answer that? What works best in your organization?
We tend to focus top down.
Okay, and Sunny?
I would say from those two categories, I'd say we're top down, and then we're trying to move, but on to bottom up, I guess. But I'm going to define bottom up in that context is get more opinions,
Right.
and get and
Not necessarily driving the process, but just
more
making sure
opinions
you hear
and,
from-
and spreading it across your organization.
Right.
Vis-a-vis, 5 to 10 people have doing and putting all the input into it.
You talked earlier about engagement, just making sure that it's everybody's problem. We talked about risk management being everybody, and this is one of the approaches. If you take a bottom-up approach, not necessarily that, a camel is a horse made by committee, but if you ask too many people, you're gonna get wild opinions all over the place. But it is good to share the problem, share the perspective, make sure that you've tapped all the sources inside the company. But you're definitely going to have a kind of a corporate outlook, a top-down approach where we want to go with this. Is that safe to say? Would you find bottom-up approaches are more common in smaller organizations? Is that, how would you answer that?
I honestly don't think I can comment on that. I mean, I know our organization,
Okay.
but I don't think I can make that general
Okay, I'll
statement.
hold you to it. Okay. Let's go on to the next question. Let's cross that one out. The next one, I'm not going to pick on Paulina, but your name comes up again here. I'll just throw it to the panel. Organizations face many business risks and challenges, the top risks being technology and innovation, and the second, talent and culture. How are companies handling succession challenges, the ability to attract and retain talent, company culture that can be resistant to change, upskilling employees who have to compete with being born digital, on and on. Because this came up as an emerging risk. Some of the risks that our industry should be looking at in the next 5 to 10 years is the threat to human capital and just where the next top player is coming from, the next top talent in our industry.
More and more people are retiring, and the insurance industry does not come across as the most appealing to the younger generation.
No.
So, yeah.
Silly joke. It's a good industry.
Yeah, but so we've experienced the same thing. So historically, our company has been known to have quite a large number of very tenured employees, and those who stayed with the company forever. Actually, last June we celebrated 50th anniversary of someone.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
The lady has been with us for 50 years, so that's something that will never happen again. I
Yeah,
can guarantee
nowadays,
that.
the kids coming into school, if you told them, are you going to be within that,
To the
ask them,
company
are you going
for
to be
50
with this
years.
organization 10 years from now? They'll look at you, are you crazy? 5 years, you'll get my best 5 years, but that's it.
So definitely we've seen the trend changing. People do not stay with the company for 50 years. And
Right.
So about, let's say 4 to 5 years ago, we've seen start of this trend. So now, right now we have a good healthy mix of people who are long tenured and very experienced, and people who are newer to our organization. And our way to prepare for this, it's a key person's risk, because definitely in our risk report. So we need to ensure that this knowledge that these long tenured people have is well documented. So for us, we do strive to have good documentation in place to cover all the processes, because they do have tremendous amount of knowledge.
You'll lose that administrative memory, that bench strength.
Yeah, and you also tend to ask these people, well, do you have anything documented? No, all in my head.
Right, that's kind of
So,
scary.
yeah, it is scary. So that's definitely a risk that we don't want, we want to avoid. So we do emphasize to have good documentation in place, and there are steps that we are implementing. And also to encourage retention, we try to promote within. Doesn't have to be vertical promotion, can be horizontal.
That's very important.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's because we are a relatively flat organization. We're a smaller organization. We're about only 200 employees in the country, and not everyone is going to be a VP, but there are other opportunities in the company, and definitely there are a lot of initiatives that we're currently working on And that's another way to bring the younger generation in and make them engaged and make them interested in where this company is going. And another thing is a tone from the top. So having frequent communication, having town hall meetings. We have an internal social media page that we share. It's like a Facebook, but just for our company.
Right.
So that's something, again, that's a modern tool that young generation can share and enjoy. So just to make them feel engaged and to make them, to empower them and to make them feel that, yeah, they're actually part of this company and we take them on the journey with us.
It's almost like a seller's market for human capital entering the system now. It's you have to, provide, we're a fun place to work where you can join our organization and grow within the organization and work your way up.
There are all kinds of opportunities. We're on a social club. We're very much involved in the community in terms of supporting all kinds of non-for-profit organizations. So,
Right.
and I see that younger people, they're very much involved in this. They do want to volunteer. They always raise their hand to go ahead and take part in the social club initiatives, or they volunteer in the different non-for-profits.
So these are really good ideas about building the brand, about
Yeah.
your organization. Or does that bring to mind other things your organizations do that, are you finding similar challenges here, reaching out to that next generation and succession planning in your areas? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the way that I would articulate it, Ian, is we have very clear corporate values that we have, and they're very public, and we're looking for employees who really emulate the values. We're promoting employees who emulate our values. We certainly offer a lot of career opportunity within the organization, so people get rotated, and I think that helps address some of the challenges that you mentioned about someone's going to be, with the organization for 50 years. The way to do that is to develop them and move them around, not necessarily 50 years of one particular area doing
Right.
one thing.
And it gives you flexibility, right? If
Yeah.
problems occur, that you have somebody that can step forward in a pinch with that skill, that job enlargement.
Yeah, and I think, Paulina, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, the younger people, they want to work for a company that shares their values, that it's not just a place to work, but it's, there's an identity involved, and I think that's a very important part. And certainly at our organization, we spend a lot of time and effort to make sure that we have a very clear and strong identity that people can relate to.
Okay. Good. I see I'm just going to check my watch here, we have about 25 minutes left, so lots more questions to get through. Let's go to Sunny on this one. Now we're into category observations in the marketplace. So once emerging risks have been identified, what do you do with them? What's your strategy for advancing them for further research, product opportunities, etc., within your organization? So we spend so much time identifying risks, or identifying these new and emerging risks, these black swan issues. What do you do now when you know for sure that that's coming down the pike?
I think some of it we've chatted about. Obviously, the communication between the risk function and the remainder of the business. One of the things that we did do, and we've done in the past, is that when we found stuff, we've engaged individuals within the organization from different functions. Let's say claims, let's say reinsurance, let's say actuarial, and we'll actually build a research team on that particular risk to further go down the path. From that perspective, if we need to see more of it, we have a product services division, and then our association, the Association of Ontario Mutual Insurance Association. One of the things that they do also is develop products for our members. So we make sure that if we see an opportunity, that we disseminate the information to the various parties, so that the people that build products can consider whether or not something actually needs to be built for it.
So how do you, Paulina and Brandon, I'll throw it open in if you choose to answer or not. So once you've identified a risk now, how do you take it forward for further research, product opportunities to leverage that? What happens in your organization, if you could share that?
Yeah, well, we have an internal risk committee, and that's where we discuss emerging risks. So we'll present them, have discussions around them.
And who's on this committee?
Well, that's
areas?
chaired by the chief risk officer, and we have senior people right up to and including the CEO, and
Okay.
the chief operating officer, president, etc. So very senior people, C-suite, chief strategy officer. So when you have that group around the table, certainly in terms of prioritizing and deciding whether action is required, it comes out pretty fluidly in the discussion.
And these meetings are regularly scheduled or as issues arise?
Quarterly.
Quarterly, okay.
Definitely, at least, sometimes more.
Okay. And Paulina, same thing?
It's basically, again, we are working off the quarterly risk report, so whatever is in there, some risks are quantified, some risks are qualified, they're updated regularly. It's a living and breathing document, so as we go through the risk report and we update it accordingly, and then there are actions taken as a result of that. And if it's also we monitor for new products, and we monitor the development of the new products and so on. So it's all done through the risk report, and the risk report is to the board. It's issued to the board on the most significant risks. And as I mentioned earlier, when I conduct those interviews with the senior executives and the department heads, I collect this information. Not everything is a risk, so not everything that they flag gets reported in the report. I look for recurrent trends or recurrent themes, and only those that are mentioned frequently by multiple people, those definitely we need to address, and we do address them regularly in the report.
So there may be risks that kind of break from the pack, that this now is a board item, that it's regularly reported to the board on a quarterly basis, taken up from your audit and risk committee, standing committees of the board. But this must be acted upon. This is a real serious issue for this organization. I guess you've had issues where that one risk of all the risks in the risk management report is so important that it's a board item. It's a discussion item of and by itself that's come up.
Yeah, we've had it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And Sunny, are we talking the same process in your organization in terms of
yes, and I'm not going to say yes and no, because at the same time we're a reinsurer, so our product is reinsurance from that standpoint. So it's not it's a little different from the product development piece. I mean, I have reinsurance contracts are kind of reinsurance contracts.
One step removed,
Yeah, and so that's when I mentioned that we have a services department that does services for our members. They're more of assisting in from, let's say, rate underwriting guidelines or helping in that standpoint. And then our association actually does product development on behalf of the mutual community.
Okay.
So, and works with members and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit different from the standpoint of I was a primary insurer and okay, I identified, then I go actually make the product, because we are one step removed.
Okay. We had such strong uptake on today's session. I think people derive great value from hearing right from the front line about challenges they face. And this next question, it sounds like it's coming from somebody who's been frustrated, and I want to see your opinion on this. For each of the panel members, in your career, what emerging risk was the most difficult for you to get your organization to take seriously? How did you do it? So is there an issue, or is there a concern? You don't have to name it, but has there been ever an issue or a risk that you're just like, don't you guys see this? I mean, this is really, really important. Do you find sometimes you're going through the motions, or clearly this person has faced some challenges?
Well, I can take it first. So I would say that first off, just because I see a risk doesn't mean I'm right.
Right.
So, or that the sense of urgency is necessarily the same in my view and other people's view. I personally haven't experienced a situation where people didn't take risk seriously.
Right.
What we could have a difference of opinion in terms of the
Ranking
importance of the risk,
right,
or the prioritization. And I think generally my approach is just one of persistence. You know, I'm just persistent. I'll bring it back regularly. And make sure that I understand the other people's perspectives, and the longer we keep it on the agenda in our reports, and we don't let it drop off the radar screen, my experience is that it gets dealt with at the appropriate.
Again, the chief pessimist, I mean, you just have to keep bringing up this is
I
something you
think
have to
so.
tackle.
I think so. I think if if you're not satisfied, I think you have to be persistent about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And how about you folks? Is that
Yeah, it's
your experience?
at the end when I let's say when I do conduct those interviews, I do bring it with my chief risk officer and who is also our CFO. We bring it to the CEO and we share what we found and yeah, not everything is a risk definitely from their perspective, and it's just like Brendan mentioned, it's the matter of repeating it over and over again, and CEO
You feel
looks at-
vindicated if it's actually
It's-
accepted down the line that you were so
It's not
persistent
always.
that-
Let me tell you, it's not always the most pleasant discussion to have. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not coming to brag about our sales, right?
Oh, no.
I'm definitely coming to say, okay, here we have problems here, right?
Right,
So
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
so for sure, it's definitely not the most pleasant.
Well, you can
discussion,
agree to
but-
disagree on things and just
Yeah,
totally.
but listen, some more hard discussions have to be had, and
Yes.
this is the place for it.
I'm sure
right?
people
Because
can relate to that.
if I'm not flagging it or if I'm not mentioning this, then I'm not doing my job, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And let's go to question number 3, and this one's for Sunny. What is your view on the way in which the insurtech disruptors will change our industry? How well placed do you think the industry is to move in line with any of these changes?
Okay, so I unpacked that question that I can't predict the future.
Right.
So I can see from my observations that I think there's been a change in the way as an industry that we actually view insurtech. It seems as though, let's go a couple years back in the headlines, insurtech's going to come and basically put us out of business. They're going to come and cause disruption, and they're a threat. And that seemed to be what you were hearing and what you were reading and so on and so forth. And now it seems as though that's kind of changed. And there looks like there's more of a viewpoint that you see individuals in our industry looking to collaborate with insurtech and attempting to try and solve some of our legacy problems or whichever they could be, and work together. So I don't know. I can't predict where it's going to go. What my observation is, it seems as though we more have a R&D sort of research and development sort of lens now looking at insurtech and saying, okay, well, where can we invest the money? Where can we potentially form strategic partnerships? That sort of thing. So that's my observation of it. From a risk perspective, I kind of think about that. I read a report a couple weeks ago that outlines all the insurtechs, and then they talk about the funding that some of them have gotten, and then they don't know where it happened to them. They sort of like, what happened to this one, what happened to that one. So I thought about years ago, there was an investment, this from a personal, not from my personal, maybe personally, but there was this investment pitch that 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, that they were doing labor-sponsored venture capital funds because the government would give you tax breaks. People were investing in them all the time, and a lot of those funds today, they're not worth a lot because they were pure venture capital funds. And I think my takeaway from all that, I kind of applied to InsurTech too, that from a risk perspective, if we're going to collaborate and form the partnerships, have a process in place to do the evaluation of what it is that you're actually getting into, so that investment or that research and development spend that your company is going to allocate towards that you're trying to achieve a return, because they do have sort of venture capital sort of characteristics to the whole space. I mean, they're looking for capital. They're looking to attempt to try and scale. To me, I think 15 years ago we called that venture capital.
Okay. Other panelists, do you want to chime in on that? Or
I'll comment
Sure.
on one type of insurtech that I've seen, and so without naming specific company names, but there are some insurance companies out there that are basically like a website, right? And they'll insure your camera or some belongings, your bike, for example, right?
Mhm.
And they have really like good social media presence and that sort of thing. And It's very basic. It's very much oriented towards the individual,
Right.
property insurance, right? But as my colleagues and you, Ian, know, there's a lot of different risks. It's in the industry that we're insuring. It's quite complicated, even within personal lines, commercial lines, auto, and the claims process, the underwriting, the sales. I think these are fairly complex functions, and so far there hasn't been something that's gone viral, for example. I see they're gaining traction, and I certainly think that there's something that they're tapping into in terms of the simplicity and the communication and that sort of thing. So I think, there's, how will it change the industry? I think to some extent you'll see better communication, better explanations, better service,
Almost justification.
These technological improvements are going to push the rest of the industry to evolve.
Right. Which is a good thing.
I think so.
Okay. Picking up on that point is the second half of the next question. So what does the panel see as the key risks of interconnectedness to insurers, but also to businesses across the globe? So communication within organizations is increasing. It's a global economy that we're competing in. What are the challenges you're seeing with that from your company's perspective? What does the panel see as the key risks of being so connected?
Well, I think you can't answer that question without talking about third-party risk management, and these days there's so many vendors out there with different offerings that solve a different part of the solution in the operations, and for sure I think that when you have one vendor who's very efficient, a lot of different companies might, look, they're,
right.
So-and-so is using, and so-and-so is using, and then a few of them, and then before you know it, there's kind of like a critical mass, and then there's like maybe a central point of failure, if you will, for that one activity within the organization. So I think that's definitely something that is a trend we see. We see our regulators talking more about third-party risk management, asking questions about it, as I think they should. And I think these are things that each individual organization has to take upon themselves and think clearly about.
Okay. Others? Do you want to?
I think Brendan hit it spot on. You think about the use of data and how much more data is playing into how we do things and where we're getting data sources from. And when I think about that, I think about storage. How many of us now today are using cloud storage comparatively to when we used to house servers? Because it's like, you think of third-party risk, and interconnectedness. Okay, what Microsoft goes down,
Right.
or Microsoft gets
You're in
hacked,
trouble, yeah.
or Google, or granted, we're storing top names that are leading in their industry,
Right.
but it doesn't mean it can't happen.
Sure.
And so, and to that critical mass, I think that a majority of businesses now probably storing their data in 4 or 5 spots. So
it's a risk. It continues to be. Okay. We talked about enterprise risk management being so important that it's got to be embraced right across the organization. What should insurers do? What should you be doing to promote the role of risk management across all functions in your organization? So it's well embraced, obviously, in your organizations, but what are some, if you had advice to people out there and they're having trouble getting buy-in throughout the organization, what are messages you can give to them to help sell ERM across all functions of an organization? I mean, we ask all these questions, best practices. We've outlined a good number of best practices in the industry. You see them repeated in our ERM questions. So in a perfect world, your answers to the following should be yes, 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 all the way down the page. But if they're not, how do you get organizations to
I think
play ball?
it's just a matter of being visible, that everyone knows in the company what risk management or integrated risk management in our organization, what we do and what we represent, what kind of functions we do. And my role, it's not just the risk management, it's also business continuity is in this, and internal controls framework is in there, also my area of responsibility. And also we do some testing of internal controls. So there is a lot, and I do reach out to various people throughout the organization with those different topics. And also there is a little bit of confusion. What topic are we talking about? So it's constant matter of educating people what is that I'm trying to say, or what kind of point I want to convey. And it just going and speaking with people through all company sessions. So we do this fairly regular meetings on when we talk about let's say new policies being introduced, right? We've reintroduced new electronic computing policies. So even though it's purely IT related, but I do talk to it as a user. So I'm a user of electronic systems and network and infrastructure. So this is my perspective on that, and this is you as a user. This is what you should know. So it was also very well received. There is continuous dialogue in regards to business continuity when we share the results of our DR exercises, and we do business continuity plans walkthroughs. So definitely I think people see me too much sometimes. So okay. Again, yeah, again, but it is important because people need to be aware and people need to know, and people also need to bring to my attention if they come across something, and they need to feel comfortable to do that. They know that they're not going to be penalized, they're not going to lose their job. But if there is something that I need to know, that they would know whom to approach.
Okay. Others?
I like Paulina's comment about visibility, and I agree wholeheartedly. It's really about communication. From time to time I get invited to team meetings in other departments, and I get an opportunity to talk about our top risks, our emerging risks, our ORSA process, stress testing, for example, these sorts of things. And so that really gives me an opportunity to promote the role of risk management in the organization and make sure people understand. And once in a while, I'll invite myself to a team meeting as well as a way of making sure that we have that dialogue. Hey,
You're the chief
call
cheerleader
someone,
there.
Hey,
Yeah.
do you guys want someone to come talk to you?
That's good.
I think that's
spread awareness throughout the organization.
I think that's part of the role. Particularly, it might be easier in smaller organizations to talk to everybody, but certainly in an organization as large as ours, it's important to make sure that you're out there and communicating.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I don't want to disappoint people out there, but we had between 40 and 50 questions, so if you didn't hear your question, I apologize for that. We will repeat this session in future, different panelists, and we'll come back to, there's some really good stock questions in the stockpile here. Final question. How should our processes differ for identifying, assessing, and managing risks within an emerging risk profile versus a current profile? So if you're looking at what's current, what's emerging, and are the approaches different for identifying, assessing, and managing risks within those,
From my standpoint, when I read this question, gave me a chuckle. And the reason being they gave me a chuckle is that I've been in some discussions and that have been debates as to whether or not something's emerging or not emerging.
Right.
And then we thought, okay, well, is it then evolving? And so it's not emerging, it's maybe evolving, or it's a current risk. And so I thought about it from the perspective that just look at everything the same way. And the distinction is, have you either formulated a strategy to leverage it, or have you formulated a strategy to mitigate it? And that's the distinction between a certain category, let's call it current, and then the rest of them are sort of in the bucket over there. And that's, I tried to boil it down to something simple.
Okay. How about you, Paulina? Is there?
Yeah, I guess it's just the way we approach. There are again, in our risk reports, there are risks that are well established. We know how to monitor, manage, control, and report on them. And then some risks that are just a lot of unknowns. So this is what the differentiation is between the existing and the emerging, right? There is a lot of unknown. Okay, what if we don't have enough, I don't know, loss history? Did we price it adequately, new products, and so on. We look just not to lose sight of anything, and just because one is emerging and therefore all the attention should be dedicated to that does not mean that we should neglect all the other risks that we know are well there and still exist and still
Careful
very
care and
relevant to
feeding,
us.
yeah.
Yes, not to lose sight
Right.
of those and to just say, oh, well, it's not a checkbox, right? It's not just check the box exercise. We do look at all the risks and they are equally important, all of them, yeah.
Okay. Brandon, final word?
Yeah, well, I would say in terms of identification and management, we approach them very much in the same way.
Mhm.
I think assessment is where it's certainly more established, the procedures that we have for assessing reserving risk, for example, or financial risk, or some of the other operational risks. But when you get into emerging risks, like some of the ones that we've talked about, it gets a little bit more difficult, the assessment phase. So I think that's where it needs a little bit more qualitative and professional judgment. But the identification, I mean, we've talked about that today in terms of the sources and the processes, and in terms of the management, establishing who's accountable and what the next steps are in terms of action items and how the organization is going to proceed. I think it's very much consistent with how we look at top enterprise risks as well.
Okay. That's probably a good point to conclude our discussion. So I want to thank our guests again for being here today. Paulina Abraham, Risk Manager with the Boiler Inspection and Insurance Company of Canada. Sonny D'Agostino, Operations Risk Manager with Farm Mutual Re. And Brandon Blant, Vice President Risk Management with Intact Financial Corporation. Thank you for the insight you provided, the perspective on risk identification and risk assessment. The best thing is when we get questions from members out there and hear directly from competitors in the industry about best practices. It works so well. A copy of this webinar will be posted on our website. You'll find that under the Risk Officers Forum tab. There will be a brief follow-up satisfaction survey. Your feedback is very helpful to us. It helps to enhance the quality of future broadcasts, and we invite your thoughts on future speakers and subject matter. And you've seen here, these are just volunteers that have stepped forward to share their ideas, so we certainly would like you to consider being a panelist in future. I'll come calling. Count on that. We have a very exciting program outlined for 2020 and hope you can join us for our various events. The next Risk Officers Forum meeting is Wednesday, April 1st. Our keynote speaker is going to be Penny Lee, Senior Director at PNC Insurance Group, the Insurance Supervision Section of OSFI, and she's going to be talking about an update on current industry issues. Penny is retiring in June, so this is her sign-off to the industry, so I hope you can be there for that meeting. And our next webinar, Emerging Risks webinar, is Wednesday, May 20th. We're going to have Matt Moore, you saw him last fall, Senior Vice President, Highway Loss Data Institute, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety is going to be joining us, and we're devoting a whole webinar to collision avoidance systems and automated driving. I want to thank our friends Mike and Jeff at EventStream for their technical expertise and support with today's broadcast, and I put a strong plug in. They're excellent at running webinars, and so if you're considering that, please do consider them at EventStream for your next webinar. This concludes today's webinar. We look forward to having you join us for future sessions. Thanks for tuning us in, and goodbye for now.